In the heart of Afghanistan's mountainous terrain, where ancient fortresses cling to impossible heights, a unique military tradition emerged that would forever change the course of warfare. The year was 1221, and the mighty Mongol Empire, fresh from conquering vast territories across Asia, had set their sights on the mountain kingdoms of the Hindu Kush. Little did they know that these rugged peaks would become their greatest challenge yet. Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu, the last prince of the fallen Khwarazmian Empire, found himself cornered in the treacherous mountains of Parwan. With Mongol forces closing in from all sides, he faced an impossible choice. Retreat meant certain capture or death, but standing and fighting seemed equally futile against the seemingly invincible Mongol war machine that had swept across continents. The Mongol forces approached with their characteristic precision and terrifying efficiency. Led by Chinggis Khan's generals, these mounted warriors had conquered kingdoms and shattered armies across the known world. Their reputation preceded them like thunder before a storm, striking fear into the hearts of even the bravest defenders. Yet something about these mountains felt different, more menacing than any battlefield they had encountered before. In the mountain villages of Parwan, word spread quickly of the approaching Mongol threat. The local warriors, hardened by generations of living in these harsh peaks, began to gather. These were not professional soldiers but farmers and herders who knew every rock, every crevice, every hidden path through their homeland. What they lacked in formal military training, they made up for in intimate knowledge of their territory and fierce determination to defend it. For centuries, the people of these mountains had perfected the art of archery, developing weapons specifically suited to their environment. Their bows were crafted from carefully selected wood, bent and shaped with patience that spanned generations. Each arrow was fletched with precision, designed to fly true through mountain winds and strike with deadly accuracy at extreme distances. This was not mere hunting equipment but instruments of survival itself. The tradition of mountain archery was passed down through generations like sacred knowledge. Elders taught children not just how to shoot but how to read the wind, judge distance by the lay of the land, and predict how arrows would behave in the thin mountain air. These lessons began in childhood and continued throughout life, creating archers whose skills were unmatched by any other warriors in the known world. What made these mountain warriors truly unique was their choice to fight on foot rather than horseback. While other armies relied on mounted archers for mobility and speed, the Afghans understood that their terrain favored infantry. On foot, they could navigate narrow mountain paths, scale rocky outcroppings, and position themselves in locations where cavalry could never reach. Their mobility came not from horses but from their intimate knowledge of every trail and goat path that crisscrossed their homeland. The Valley of Parwan presented a perfect killing ground for skilled archers. Natural choke points funneled any invading force into narrow corridors where they could be easily targeted. Ancient fortifications, built over centuries by various kingdoms, provided elevated positions from which arrows could rain down with devastating effect. Every ridge, every rock formation, every tree line offered potential cover for ambush while denying the same advantages to their enemies. The Mongol generals, confident in their cavalry's superiority, ordered a direct assault up the mountain passes. Their horses, bred for speed and endurance across the steppes, struggled with the steep inclines and loose rock of these foreign mountains. As they charged forward in their usual disciplined formations, they unknowingly placed themselves in the perfect position for the ambush that awaited them above. High above the struggling Mongol column, the Afghan archers waited with the patience of predators. They had positioned themselves at carefully chosen locations, each warrior finding natural cover that hid them from view while providing clear sight lines to the valley below. Not a sound escaped their lips, not a movement betrayed their presence. They understood that their first volley would likely be their most important, and they intended to make every arrow count. Without warning, the mountain came alive with the whistle of arrows. Hundreds of shafts descended from impossible heights, striking with the force of divine judgment. Mongol warriors who had never faced such concentrated archery fire found themselves fighting not just enemies but gravity itself, as death rained down from above. Horses reared and screamed, riders tumbled from saddles, and the carefully maintained Mongol discipline began to crack under the unexpected assault. The Afghan archers worked with mechanical efficiency, each man knowing his role in the deadly symphony they were conducting. They had practiced these shots countless times, learning to compensate for wind, distance, and the movement of their targets. Their arrows carried not just physical force but the accumulated wisdom of generations who had perfected this art of mountain warfare. Every shaft that left their bows was a prayer answered, a life taken in defense of their homeland. Desperately, the Mongol warriors attempted to return fire, raising their own bows toward the source of their torment. But they faced an impossible situation. Shooting uphill against an enemy who could choose their positions and remain largely invisible was like trying to shoot birds from the sky. Their arrows fell short or flew wide, while the deadly rain from above continued unabated. Worse still, their fallen horses blocked the narrow trail, trapping them in a killing ground of their own making. Among the wounded Mongols, a seasoned warrior lay bleeding among the rocks, his prized warhorse dead beside him. As he looked up toward the peaks where death had rained down upon his comrades, something unprecedented happened. In all his years of conquest, he had never encountered enemies who could strike so effectively without ever being seen. The respect that crossed his pain-filled features would have been unthinkable just hours before, but these mountain warriors had earned it through their deadly skill. From their commanding positions high above the battlefield, the Afghan leaders orchestrated the ambush with the precision of conductors leading an orchestra. They had spent years learning not just to shoot arrows but to coordinate complex tactical movements across difficult terrain. Each signal they gave, each command they issued, was designed to maximize the effectiveness of their limited numbers against the superior forces arrayed below them in the valley. When the first volley ended, the mountain pass told a story of devastation. Mongol warriors lay where they had fallen, their armor and weapons scattered among the rocks. Survivors huddled behind whatever cover they could find, tending to wounded comrades while trying to comprehend what had just happened to them. The narrow trail that had seemed like their path to victory had become a trap from which there appeared to be no escape. In the brief respite that followed the initial assault, the Mongol commanders gathered to assess their unprecedented predicament. These were men who had never known defeat, whose armies had swept aside every enemy they had encountered. Yet here, in these alien mountains, they found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned by warriors they had likely dismissed as mere peasants. The maps they studied now seemed inadequate, failing to convey the true tactical nightmare their forces had blundered into. While their enemies struggled to adapt to mountain warfare, the Afghan warriors moved through their homeland like shadows given form. They had learned from childhood to read the terrain, to find paths where others saw only impassable rock, and to use every natural feature to their advantage. This was not just fighting but dancing with the mountains themselves, and they were the most graceful dancers these peaks had ever seen. The Afghan commanders, recognizing their advantage, ordered a second, more focused assault. This time, their archers targeted not just the rank and file but the officers and standard-bearers whose presence was crucial to maintaining Mongol discipline. Arrow after arrow found its mark with supernatural accuracy, striking down commanders and creating chaos among the already disorganized Mongol forces. The message was clear: no one was safe from the deadly rain that fell from above. Among those struck down in the second wave was a Mongol officer whose elaborate armor and commanding presence had made him a natural target. As he fell, his warriors watched in stunned silence, their confidence crumbling like snow in an avalanche. In all their campaigns across Asia, they had never faced enemies who could strike with such precision from such distances. The myth of Mongol invincibility, carefully cultivated over years of conquest, began to crack in the face of this unexpected resistance. High above the chaos they had created, the Afghan warriors allowed themselves a moment of quiet satisfaction. They had achieved what many would have considered impossible, turning back the tide of Mongol conquest through skill and intimate knowledge of their homeland. Yet they knew this was only the beginning. Their celebration was measured and brief, for they understood that survival depended not on momentary victories but on sustained resistance against enemies who would not give up easily. As the reality of their situation sank in, Mongol warriors attempted to retreat, only to find their escape route blocked by the very chaos their ambush had created. Fallen horses, wounded men, and scattered equipment choked the narrow trail, making organized movement impossible. Those who tried to climb the steep slopes found themselves exposed to even more deadly fire from above, while those who remained in the trail became easy targets for the patient archers who watched from their elevated positions. Understanding that their enemies would not remain trapped forever, the Afghan commanders ordered their archers to shift positions, maintaining constant pressure while denying the Mongols any opportunity to regroup or organize an effective counterattack. The warriors moved with practiced efficiency, using the changing light and shifting shadows to mask their movements. To the trapped Mongols below, it must have seemed as though the very mountains themselves had risen up against them. Driven to desperation by the unrelenting assault, some Mongol warriors abandoned tactical discipline and charged directly up the slopes toward their hidden enemies. These brave but foolhardy attempts at direct confrontation played directly into the Afghans' hands, exposing the attackers to perfect target practice while achieving nothing of tactical value. Individual courage, no matter how fierce, could not overcome the fundamental disadvantage of fighting uphill against enemies who knew every rock and crevice of their defensive positions. Rather than attempting to destroy the Mongol force in a single engagement, the Afghan commanders employed tactics designed for sustained harassment. Small groups of warriors would appear suddenly, loose a few well-aimed arrows, then vanish back into the rocks before their enemies could respond. This constant pressure, combined with the psychological toll of fighting an invisible enemy, began to wear down even the legendary Mongol discipline. They were not just fighting warriors but ghosts that could strike from anywhere and everywhere. As the sun climbed higher, the harsh mountain environment began to favor the defenders even more decisively. The Mongol warriors, burdened with heavy armor designed for steppe warfare, began to suffer from the heat and altitude. Their horses, already stressed by the difficult terrain, grew increasingly restless and difficult to control. Meanwhile, their lightly clad opponents moved with increasing confidence through terrain they had known since childhood, using every advantage the landscape provided to maintain their tactical superiority. Recognizing that they could not escape the deadly fire from above, the Mongol warriors attempted to create defensive positions using their shields and any materials they could scavenge from the battlefield. But the narrow confines of the mountain trail made effective fortification impossible, and their improvised barriers proved inadequate against arrows that could strike with pinpoint accuracy from extreme distances. Casualties continued to mount as the patient archers above picked off targets one by one with mechanical precision. From his commanding position, an Afghan commander studied the trapped Mongol force with the satisfaction of a master strategist who had seen his plan unfold perfectly. The enemy that had seemed so formidable just hours before now struggled helplessly in a trap of their own making. Every tactical principle his people had learned over generations of mountain warfare had been applied with devastating effect, turning superior numbers and reputation into tactical irrelevance through superior positioning and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Realizing that they could not fight their way out of the trap, Mongol warriors attempted to signal for help using smoke and other traditional methods of battlefield communication. But the mountain terrain, which had served them so poorly as an invasion route, now worked against them in reverse, blocking line of sight to any potential reinforcements. Their desperate calls for assistance echoed unanswered through the peaks, leaving them isolated and increasingly desperate in their rocky prison. The Afghan commanders demonstrated tactical sophistication by ordering their archers to target the Mongol horses rather than the riders directly. They understood that mobility was the foundation of Mongol military effectiveness, and without their prized steeds, the invaders would be reduced to foot soldiers in unfamiliar terrain. As horse after horse fell or was wounded, the narrow trail became even more impassable, while the surviving animals grew increasingly difficult to control under the constant stress of arrow fire from impossible heights. For the first time in living memory, fear began to show on the faces of Mongol warriors. These were men who had conquered kingdoms and faced armies that fled at their approach, yet here they found themselves helpless against an enemy they could not see or reach. The legendary Mongol discipline, forged in countless battles across Asia, began to crack under the psychological pressure of fighting an invisible enemy who could strike from anywhere with deadly precision. The myth of their invincibility, so carefully cultivated, began to seem like mere propaganda in the face of this inexplicable defeat. Recognizing that their enemies were approaching the breaking point, the Afghan commanders ordered intensified attacks designed to maximize psychological impact. They concentrated their fire on officers and standard bearers, knowing that removing leadership would accelerate the collapse of Mongol discipline. The trapped warriors below, already suffering from constant unseen attack, began to show clear signs of panic as their carefully maintained formations dissolved into chaos. The patient archers above had learned that sometimes the most effective weapon was not the arrow itself but the fear it inspired. As Mongol discipline finally collapsed entirely, individual warriors began to abandon all tactical considerations and attempt desperate solo escapes. Some tried to climb rock faces that would have challenged mountain goats, while others attempted to hide among the dead and wounded comrades scattered along the trail. These actions, while understandable given the circumstances, marked the complete breakdown of the military cohesion that had made the Mongols so fearsome. What had begun as a disciplined military column was now reduced to scattered individuals fighting for survival against an enemy they could neither see nor reach. Seeing that their enemies were nearly broken, the Afghan warriors began to close the trap by moving down from their commanding positions and surrounding the few remaining organized Mongol groups. They maintained their tactical advantage by staying just out of reach while applying constant pressure from multiple directions. The mountain terrain, which had served them so well throughout the engagement, continued to work in their favor, naturally funneling the surviving Mongols into smaller and smaller areas where escape became mathematically impossible. The patient hunters were now closing in on their cornered prey. In the final moments of what had seemed like a routine conquest, the last organized Mongol resistance collapsed entirely. Warriors who had conquered vast territories across Asia now found themselves fighting not for empire but for survival in a battle they had never should have entered. The same mountain landscape that had seemed so promising during their initial advance had proven to be their tomb, a place where tactical superiority counted for nothing against intimate knowledge of terrain and the patience to use it properly. The myth of Mongol invincibility died that day in the mountains of Parwan, struck down by arrows from above and the harsh reality of fighting in an environment where they were strangers. As the dust settled and silence returned to the mountain pass, the Afghan warriors surveyed the evidence of their unprecedented victory. The expressions on their faces showed not triumph but relief and pride in a job well done. They had defended their homeland against the seemingly invincible Mongols through skill, courage, and intimate knowledge of their terrain. Yet they understood that even victory came at a cost, and the process of tending to their own wounded and counting their losses began immediately. This was not conquest but survival, and they had survived against impossible odds. News of the defeat in Parwan spread quickly through the Mongol army, carrying with it implications that would echo through future campaigns across Asia and Europe. Other Mongol commanders, who had never faced such resistance, were forced to reconsider their assumptions about tactical superiority and the ease of conquest. Maps were studied, new strategies developed, and special attention paid to the unique challenges of mountain warfare. The arrows that had fallen from the peaks of Parwan had struck not just Mongol warriors but the very foundation of their military philosophy, forcing adaptations that would influence their approach to future enemies who dared to defend their homelands with equal determination. From his vantage point overlooking the battlefield, Jalal ad-Din Mingburnu reflected on the tactical masterpiece he had witnessed. He understood how the Afghan warriors had turned apparent disadvantages into decisive advantages, using terrain and mobility in ways that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. The defeat of the Mongols, his enemies, had given him insights that would prove invaluable in his own desperate struggle for survival against the forces that had destroyed his empire. Sometimes the greatest lessons come not from victory but from observing how others achieve the impossible against overwhelming odds. The victory at Parwan would echo through military history for centuries, becoming a textbook example of how inferior forces could defeat seemingly invincible enemies through superior tactics, preparation, and intimate knowledge of their environment. Scribes throughout the medieval world recorded the details of this remarkable engagement, while military theorists studied and debated the tactical innovations that had allowed foot archers to destroy mounted cavalry. The battle became required study for commanders facing similar terrain, and the name Parwan entered military vocabulary as shorthand for the deadly potential of well-executed ambush tactics in mountain warfare. Today, the lessons of Parwan continue to resonate in military academies and among those who study the art of warfare. Modern reenactors practice the same techniques that proved so devastating against the Mongols, demonstrating how intimate knowledge of terrain and superior archery skills can overcome technological and numerical advantages. The mountains that witnessed that legendary battle remain largely unchanged, serving as a reminder that while weapons and armies may evolve, the fundamental principles of using environment to maximum tactical advantage remain eternal. The arrows that fell from those peaks in 1221 carried a message that still speaks to military minds today.